Hi, I'm Brett, and today we're bringing you information that's important to your operation, with our focus being on safety. That's safety for you and your cattle, which in the end creates a safe food product and a safe environment for all involved. Our main topic will be proper cattle processing. That's a concern for every cattleman, and here to help me out are two veterinarians who know a lot about it. Dr. Tom Portillo of Progressive Veterinary Services and Dr. Brad Williams, Elanco Beef Technical Consultant. From time to time, they will share their thoughts as we make our way through this series brought to you by Elanco. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is good stockmanship, because that's really where it all starts. Handling cattle correctly is absolutely essential to keeping them healthy. It lowers their stress levels, which helps keep their immune systems working well, and it reduces injuries. They feel better, they eat better, they rest better.
Animal handling has become more of a critical issue, becoming more and more important as we realize the effect of stress on cattle. Stress is a cumulative event. There's usually not one episode that'll be detrimental to the immune system. So there's a lot of forms of stress we can't control. Weather, environment, things of this nature. So the ones that we can control, we try to control as much as possible. And one of the big ones would be the way that we handle cattle. And the other one would be obviously trying to prevent injuries to the cattle. And also we have to consider the safety of the people working the cattle. So the more stress that we put on top of them, the more fractious they're likely to become, and the more chance we have to encounter an accident, not only with cattle, but also with those charged with handling them.
Facilities are another important factor to think about when you handle your cattle. There are whole books written on the subject of good facilities. And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all design. So for now, we'll just hit the high points. When you bring cattle in, you'll want to have 2 or more sorting pens. That's going to work better than one large pen because you'll have more manageable groups for your crew to work with. When it comes to chutes and crowding pens, think curves. Any sharp turns or corners give cattle a chance to get balled up and try to turn around. By keeping them from seeing what's happening ahead, the curves also make it more likely they'll keep moving forward easily, just watching and following the animal directly in front of them. An exception to the curves, often associated with tubs, is the concept of a bud box, which is another cattle handling facility design. With a bud box, a group of cattle are moved into a rectangular box pen and are moved past the opening of the alley to the chute when a solid sided gate is closed behind them. When the cattle turn, they naturally believe they are returning from the way they came, and they flow out into the alternate alley where the chute will be located. And about that crowding pen, even though it's called a crowding pen, that doesn't mean you should overcrowd it. Cattle can bunch up and block the chute entrance. As a good rule of thumb, don't let your crowding pen get more than 3/4 full. Cattle should move into the chute without too much trouble, unless there are distractions like dangling chains or flapping twine. So keep an eye out for those types of things. Remember that cattle naturally want to move from dark areas towards light areas. But at the same time, they don't like crossing over dark shadows, like if there's a distinct line where they have to step from bright light to darkness. So it's a good idea to keep everything as evenly lit as you possibly can. You might want to try covering the sides of the squeeze chute as well, so they can't see daylight out the sides, only in the front. You'll probably get less balking as they try to head for the light. Of course, it's not just the facilities that matter. The handlers are the other key factor. I'm sure you've noticed that cattle react in particular and often predictable ways to what's going on around them. So anyone handling cattle should also keep in mind a few basic concepts.
For me, in my mind, it all boils down to 2 things: pressure and control. So when we talk about pressure, we have to pressure cattle to move them. And when we talk about 2 of the key words would be position and angle. That's how you pressure cattle. You get into their world and you start moving around in that world. Getting into their world would be your position. Moving around in their world would be your angle. And that's how we pressure cattle to begin to move them. Control is just as important. How far we get into the world and the movements that we make into the world allows us to drive the cattle or control them, get them to do what we need them to do, or ask them to do what we need them to do. If we're not cognizant of the effect we're having in that world, then we increase speed. And anytime that you increase speed, you increase the chance that we're going to lose control. And then that's when we encounter accidents.
In addition to control and pressure, another concept that is often talked about is the flight zone. If a person knows how to use them, cattle flight zones can be very helpful when handling cattle.
So the first thing we talk about is a flight zone, and it's a concept that everybody has become more and more familiar with. It's used, other terms used to describe it, but basically it's cattle's comfort zone. Everybody has a comfort zone. You, I, horses, cattle, dogs. It's that area around us where we start to feel uncomfortable, or our attitude changes whenever anybody or anyone enters that zone. So we roll back to pressure and control and being attentive, paying attention. So when we go to move either single animals or groups of animals, the first thing we've got to be able to do is identify where that area is where we need to drive them from. So as we move into that flight zone, we have to pay attention to the animal's response to us getting closer to them. And once we identify that area, then we know where it is we have to start working that animal from. And then it goes back into control and speed. If we identify that, we know where to drive it from, they're easier to control. So the animals are easier to control, we can maintain a proper speed, less chance for losing control. When we move in there too fast or too close, things speed up, they get more rapid. We're going to lose control. Cattle are going to get away from us, more chance for injury to them, encounter accidents on our part.
One thing people will find, if they use flight zones, they get voluntary motion from their cattle. The cattle think it's their idea to go into the pen, and that means handlers can put away their cattle prods, which is a great thing. Cattle prods create tremendous stress for the cattle. They'll instantly generate the very thing we're working so hard to minimize. Not to mention, prods are not as effective as proper handling techniques. So don't undo all your efforts with a cattle prod. If you have an animal heading the wrong way in the chute, try waving a flag in front of its nose. Here's another thing you can do to minimize stress. Turn down the volume. There's no need for handlers to be hollering or whistling at their cattle, or at each other. Try not to yell across the pens. Just try to keep in mind that you want a calm environment. By the way, all of these practices make things a lot more pleasant for your crew too. You'll reduce your own stress at the same time that you're reducing cattle stress, sickness, and injuries. That's a win-win. Proper cattle handling is a topic that many beef industry experts focus on, and you can always continue to learn more.
There's lots of different places you can go to for information, local, state cattle feeding organizations, anybody that works with any kind of BQA program. There's also the Kansas State Beef Institute at K-State's another great resource for that as well. And also definitely your consulting veterinarian. You've got extension veterinarians. Again, this has become more, and this issue has become more and more prominent. And I'd be hard-pressed to think there wasn't a single consultant out there that doesn't prioritize this issue. So if it was something they couldn't do themselves, they would definitely help you seek out a source or maybe an expert in the industry that could help you and your crew implement some of these practices on your feed yard.
Again, those great websites on the subject he suggested checking out were the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University and the Beef Quality Assurance Program. I'm sure we could talk all day about the finer points of good stockmanship, but we've built a pretty solid foundation on the subject of facilities, proper restraint, and controlling animal movement. So let's move on to the next video in our series, where we'll talk some more about processing cattle and using injectable products safely.